So, how do you actually instill fear? It's a tricky subject, and many games get it completely wrong. Have you ever played a game where the only times it feels scary is when the monster jumps out at you? That's because it's the cheapest way of creating fear in any type of media. To properly demonstrate a great way to create fear, I will need to look at case studies, a showcase of brilliant use of fear. The game we will look into is Subnautica. Subnautica is a game which poses itself as a survival game. Its luscious waters and pretty fish create an atmosphere of safety and warmth. But then it hits you.
Right there.
You get a little too close to the aura.
I hear the Reaper.
And then?
Where am I at?
Boom! A Reaper Leviathan grabs you from behind. You can't control anything and you're just waiting for the submarine to explode. That's the first step in realising that Subnautica is actually a pure horror game designed to trigger phobias and instill fear in some of the most unique and creative ways a game has ever done. To understand how this game is scary, let's split it up into sections. We have the visual effects, or how the monsters of the deep are portrayed throughout. Sound design, how the environment sounds. Environment design, the shape of the landscape and the use of biomes. And finally, game design, and how it purposely ties into real-life phobias. Let's start off with the easiest to tackle, visual effects. Visual effects in Subnautica are varied throughout. There are some fish and plants that look similar to things of this world, such as the creep vines, which look a lot like seaweed, and peepers, which look like a typical tropical fish, with a huge eye. But then you head deeper into the depths, and you'll find creatures that look like they just stepped out of a H.P. Lovecraft novel and jumped into the sea. Octopods with teleportation abilities, giant leviathans which breathe underwater fire, and of course, we can't go this far without mentioning the big good of the whole game, the Sea Emperor Leviathan. These creatures are huge, and though sometimes the animations can be a little janky, they are extremely pleasing to the fearful side of the game. Though, none of these monsters scare me as much as one much smaller creature. The crab squid. When I first entered the blood kelp biome, a blood-tingling sound came from the depths. That is one of the best sounds I've ever heard in any horror game. The electrical pulses, the depth of the bass, everything about this creature is terrifying. That leads us on to the next part, sound design. The sound of Subnautica is a terrifying hellscape in all honesty. The first time you load into a game, you're bombarded with the sounds of your life pod crashing. And when you get outside, it's not much better. Reefbacks are huge, peaceful creatures, but listen to this sound and tell me that it isn't awfully terrifying. Yeah, the sounds of this game are incredible. The music, the ambience, the creatures, the machinery, it all plays an integral part in creating an immersive and godforsaken landscape. Just listen to some of these sounds. The environment is huge, the biomes are expansive, and the creatures unique in every way. Unlike most games, the map doesn't just stretch on 2 dimensions. Subnautica offers another dimension: depth. Depth is very overlooked in games, most of the time. Games tend to offer 2 coordinates for their maps, X and Y, but when games throw in a Z, that's where things get a bit interesting. A map like that can't be created as a minimap, as a minimap can never show you the true depths of something. This is something Subnautica does so right. The only maps in Subnautica is the one on the Sea Glide, a handheld speed increase machine, and the control room. These maps can't be seen anywhere else, so if the player wants to search around a minimap, they need to always go back to one of those 2 things. But the most underrated thing about depth is a dark, open expanse, growing inside as a player sinks lower and lower and lower, and, well, the lowest point in the game is 1,700 meters down. This part of the game makes my blood tingle, looking up and seeing that there's much more space upwards than there is downwards. The feeling of isolation in a land that's completely foreign. The feeling that you may never escape, your prawn suit may not even reach its way out of there, and you'll be forced to die and restart way back at the sea level. Okay, but now you're down here, surely you can hunt down some of those monsters, right? Surely there's not a way to die to these beasts. Well, unless you're going to try and heat blade these creatures to death, I don't even think that's possible. There's literally no weapons in the game. The closest we have to weapons are the torpedoes, which barely do anything in the long run, and cost more resources than what it's actually worth. This is a key point in Subnautica's design, as because there's no weapons in the game, there's no reliable way of killing enemies, and therefore gives the player a sense of helplessness, which is another real world phobia, agoraphobia. Well, let's take a moment to talk about our sponsor, Thalassophobia. Have you ever been scared of the ocean? Have you ever seen a shark and thought, nope? Let's take a look at these images. If your stomach is twisting inside, you may have thalassophobia. I know I do. On a serious note, Subnautica presents the open darkness of the ocean in a very specific way. There's not just one example of a real world phobia taking place within this game. There are other phobias in there, so let's just reel them off the tongue. Acrophobia, nyctophobia, claustrophobia, submechanophobia, and let me try and get this one right, megalohydrothalassophobia. Oh, and just to chuck one last one in the mix, arachnophobia. Subnautica presents these phobias on purpose. They're part of the core game design. It's truly horrific, and that's why Subnautica is one of the best horror games ever created. So what have we learned? The art in your game has to be both terrifying and wonderfully created. The use of sculpting and modelling with great concept creation will aid you in this process. The particles and lighting in your game has to do the same things. Use lumen, post-processing, atmospheric fog, exponential height fog, and every visual effect you can think of will come into play when creating this game. And your ideas for this need to be written down. Sounds are incredibly important in creating atmosphere and tension. Don't go for a cheap jump scare, go for a scream or some sort of scary sound. Music is used to add tension. Build up your layers of sounds, use silence in the correct places, anything to make your game feel as r/sweaty palms as possible. Use environments to your advantage, use depth, show huge structures and make the background mean something, use darkness and brightness, think about phobias, use everything you can possibly think of and overload the player's emotions. Use clever mechanics in the game, create feelings of helplessness. You don't want to create an adventure game, you want the character to feel incredibly underpowered when playing your game. And most of all, good luck. Most people don't even think about this stuff when creating horror.